Welcome to the On the Rise podcast, where we talk about time freedom, passive investing through real estate, finance, mindset, and how to integrate your faith into your work. Let's dive in. Quick disclaimer as always, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. I'm not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer. Here we go. Welcome to the On the Rise podcast. I'm your host, Nick Stromwall. Really excited about our guest today, Keegan O'Connor. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this can be really exciting. One of our friends, introduced us, Scott, and we're excited just to hear more about your story. Just to read your bio quick, and then feel free to fill in any gaps. So Keegan is the co-founder and CEO of Chill Shark, an innovative wellness tech company pioneering portable cold-plunge chiller systems. With a passion for recovery, performance, and mental health, Keegan has led the company through a successful Kickstarter, strong pre-orders, B2B pilots with luxury hotels, pro sports teams, and wellness leaders. So I'm really excited to hear more about that, but tell me more about Chill Shark.
Yeah, so Chill Shark started it about probably 2.5 years ago, but it was to solve my own problem. I wanted to cold plunge in my apartment, and I went and bought a couple solutions that were on market, and none of them really did the trick. And that was when I realized that there was a really big opportunity, and that's what got it started. But there's a whole, there's a whole passion behind it. I think cold water immersion can really help a lot of people, like genuinely. And I'd love to talk about that at some point. But yeah, so
Tell us more of your story. Like, what led you to want to even start cold plunging? Tell us more of the background. It sounds exciting.
yeah, so I guess I'll just jump right into it. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I ended up having to go to a PTSD treatment program. And I learned a lot about how you treat PTSD, which is basically you throw 15 things at the patient to find the one or two things that stick. And so when I left, I actually found cold water immersion. It wasn't offered in the program. And when I wanted to integrate it into my life, I live in an apartment, I wanted to do it in the morning, and I wanted to remove the friction of doing it. And it was like the one thing that worked and regulated my nervous system. And that was what really spurred it, because there was no product that really solved my own problem. And when I went out to start to understand the different markets that were open, I went to University of Texas, realized that there was an opportunity in athletics for on the road in hotels. And then I realized there was a larger consumer demand. But when I went to more of the medical side of things, I met with doctors, and then I met with some athletic trainers at the military, and I was like, hey, could we start by trying this with the veterans or the people who are at high risk of they're high risk of suicide on base, or they're struggling. They said, why would we do that? I was like, what do you mean? Because it'll help them. And they're like, where's the research backing this? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm the research. I know this helps. And they said, come back to me when you have research. And so I got really frustrated. And I realized that there had been no clinical research on cold water immersion in treating PTSD. And then I put together a medical advisory board. I found the first clinic out of Florida. We ran the first summary research on 33 veterans, and we saw that across, obviously it's summary research, not IRB, but we found that it reduces the PTSD symptoms across the board for every single person who participated in it. It reduced inflammation, reduced cortisol levels. And what we did was we shortened up the protocols instead of, what had historically been used. But that within itself is kind of what's kept me going in the business when it got really hard. Is I've done a lot of different businesses in my life, and I would always get to a certain point where I'd be like, I don't really care about gardening tools or landscaping, but this is the first time I feel like I have an opportunity that actually can help people, and nobody's going to do it unless I do it, and I just feel like I have you know, a different type of energy for it. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
That's really cool. So I've done cold plunging several times at friends' houses, and then living in Minnesota, when our lakes freeze, we actually take our chainsaw out on the lake, cut a hole in the water,
Oh no way.
take the ice off, and then jump in. We call it going for a dip. And I've never made it more than just kind of like down and up, and then I'm out of there within 10, 15 seconds. But I have friends that sit in there for minutes at a time. How long are you typically doing the cold plunge for?
Yeah. So the what I have learned is there has been no like aggregate research on the optimal time, temperature, and duration for cold plunging. But when you get into cold water after a certain period of time, it's going to vary for the individual. It'll trigger what they call like the cold shock response. I'm not an expert by any means, but it which basically releases, for lack of better words, happy chemicals. And as soon as you feel that shiver and your body releases, you've gotten the benefits that you need from cold water immersion. I personally only need to stay in for a minute and a half at 50 degrees. And but what the most important part is consistency of doing it. So after 10 days or so, give or take, your body starts to adapt to it and starts to crave it. And that's when you really start to get the long-term benefits from cold water immersion, whether it's focus, improving depression symptoms, reducing inflammation in the body, reducing cortisol levels. So just overall, over time with consistent application, it makes a huge difference. But if you get in once, obviously you'll feel a rush when you get after, but the the consistency is what drives the outcome. And we're really focused on doing the research to support this, and then using like integrations with Whoop, Aura, Apple Health, Garmin to start to aggregate a large data set that will then be able to help us start to really understand how to optimize the protocols to help people. So long story short, I would say start at a minute, 50 degrees, and then work your way up. But you don't need to stay in there for 5 to 10 minutes,
That's
in my opinion.
that's really exciting. So, if I remember right too, you were an athlete at one point. Are you marketing this purely for like the mental health, or is there a wide range of benefits?
Well, so I started like based, and this is actually why I was really excited to come on this podcast, because I could actually talk about faith and how that plays a really important role. But when I first went out and started to raise capital, the mission didn't excite a lot of the traditional investors, because obviously they're focused on return, and trying to sell that we're going to get a military contract over 2 to 3 years was a tough thing to justify, right? So our first application we found was within professional sports. So for on the road and hotels. So we have a number of uh, NBA teams, NHL teams, NCAA D1 teams who've purchased our product. And then we realized an even bigger opportunity was within luxury hospitality, which is really where our core focus is now. And so our goal with the company is we're going to capitalize on a market within luxury hospitality and residences, and then as we start to scale up manufacturing, we'll be able to reinvest and reduce the cost and make it more accessible on a broader scale. But when I was looking at in order to make a quality product that removes friction for us at small batch manufacturing, it's super expensive. So we have to command a higher price point, which, the luxury market can afford. And then ultimately the real goal is to use that to fund the R&D and start to get this out on a larger scale as we do the research congruently, the whole time.
Great. What's the mission of the company? Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, simple as I want cold water immersion to be adopted as a PTSD treatment strategy. Like, that is my number one goal. And the reason is because it it is not going to change every single person's life in the world. Like, that is the reality. But it could make the difference. Could be the one thing that makes a difference for somebody who's really struggling with PTSD. And it's such a simple fix. Like, it doesn't have to be my product. It can just be ice and water. And being able to provide the evidence that will get make more people aware that this is something that can actually help them, and it's something that they can integrate into their life, very low cost. I see that as something that is worth, committing my life to figuring out. And ultimately, just seeing the feedback from the people who are already, were using it and went through um, the research that we already had. It was really, that was like out of everything we've done, that's what I'm most proud of, without a doubt. And it doesn't even like it's not even it doesn't even like from an investor standpoint, if I tell them that, they like gloss over it. I'm like, okay, but I don't know. I just feel like it is the single most important thing I can be doing, because the more that I've learned about veterans, I'm not a veteran myself. I suffered from a different type of PTSD, but um, imagine being picked up. So you join the military, say age 18. You are in some small town, you leave, you work really hard your whole life, you go up rank, up rank, up rank, you have all this credibility in the military, and then you leave and you go back to that town that, you know, you came from. And you had some, really difficult exposure in war, but you come back and then you just are kind of left on your own, and you don't have any rank, you don't really understand how the civilian life works, and you don't have resources that can help you manage a lot of the symptoms from the PTSD. And so there is a significant effort now to start to help people, but why wouldn't we have a very easy, accessible solution that anyone could use? At least try, start there. You know what I mean? And so, that's why I'm passionate about it. It helped me, it changed my life, and it certainly can help a few more people.
That's amazing. So let's just talk about leadership a little bit. You were a part of a sports team in college. I want to hear more about that. How do you feel like those skills translate into starting a business and leading a business now?
Yeah. Well, first off, there's nothing I have in my life that wasn't given to me by the grace of God. So the reality is finding God was the single most important thing that, I grew up Catholic and then kind of ran away from my faith and came back probably 3 or 4 years ago. And as I've started to get more into, you know, trying to understand my relationship with God and get closer with God, it's just been making my decisions a lot easier. But the foundation of leadership, you know, I was captain on a team in high school. I was captain on a team in college, and learning how to serve a team or lead by leading with service and really trying to focus on the team over yourself. I felt like that was something that I try to carry forward. And whether it's just focusing on the single most important thing, which is if you're building a business, you need to focus on serving the customer, or, serving, we aren't that big of a team right now. So like serving my business partner. But trying to lead with integrity, like when we go out, we're raising money and, people are asking questions, we try to present everything as honestly as possible. All of these things I feel like are a direct result of doing the opposite and realizing that it was the wrong thing. There's a lot of different lessons that I've learned from leading teams, but um, yeah, that's yeah, that was a long-winded answer.
Oh, that's cool. Love to double click more on your kind of coming to faith or testimony story. That was the thing you put on as the top thing you wanted to talk about today. Tell me the story. Like, where does your faith enter in, and what was that experience like? Maybe like the before, the during, and then the after.
Okay, so I always had faith in something. I grew up Catholic, and it was something that was um, just I showed up. I was always around it, so I would hear the stories of the Bible, hear about God, but it was never something that I like tried to learn and understand for myself. I was very much focused on the world, and still, I still struggle with that, as I'm sure most people do. But um, when I got to college, I just completely walked away from my faith. I didn't really. I think I was just mad at the world, mad at God, blamed God for a lot of things that had happened in my life, and I really started struggling when I moved down to Austin after college, and I started going to therapy, and had some repressed memories come back from when I was a kid that really started a journey of what ultimately landed me in a 45-day PTSD inpatient treatment program. And the whole process of recovering from all this stuff was just trying to understand how God could let terrible things happen to kids and myself. Like, how could that exist in the world, you know? And like, how could I always knew I have to forgive, but how can you really, like, how does any of that make sense? And when me and, my brother's down here, and we were both really struggling. Um, And when I got out of the PTSD treatment program, I realized that the light in my brother's eyes had just completely changed. It was like we were both struggling. He was in pain, I was in pain. And he just had this lightness about him that I didn't understand. And I remember, like, I was really struggling one day, and I was like, I don't know what that is, but I want that. Like, he looked so free, you know? And so I ended up going to church with him one day, and I remember, like, looking over at him, and he was just, like, crying, and come to find out he had been just praying for me to, like, connect with God. And, throughout all of this, I realized that, good can't exist without bad, and humans inherently are sinful, and, God's not to blame for the actions of other people. And when I started to see God, my life got better, and I feel like I got the same freedom that my brother has. And it's been a really long journey, but it's the most important thing in my life now, and I'm just completely surrendered. Like, literally, I pray all the time, like, "God, if this is not what you want me to do with my life, just destroy this business and take it away from me, because I do not care." Like, but I do believe that I have a story that I wanna tell about, you know, finding God and how God completely changed my life. But ultimately, just like suffering is what made me find God. It was literally the only, I was just like, couldn't figure out how to live, you know? Yeah. But I'm grateful. And like, it was been terrible, it's terribly tough few years. But I feel like when the one thing I've learned about like PTSD for that matter is like there are two ways you can go in your life when you have really bad things happen. You can just keep sitting in them, or you find a way to take them and turn them into something good and find meaning in it and share it with the world. And that's what I'm trying to do underneath all of this. And I try not to lead with it candidly, because I want people to buy the product and like invest in the company because they believe in it. But at the same time, like, the underlying mission of this business is cold water immersion treatment strategy for PTSD, and that is the goal, and that's what I pray about all the time. And we'll see what happens. And if God completely takes this away from me, that's okay too, But I'm doing everything I can to that. But yeah, so that was kind of my, I guess, convoluted journey.
Hey everyone, just a quick word before we jump back into this episode. I'm Zach, the CEO of Rise 48 Equity, and I want to take a moment to share a little bit about what we do and why we do it, because I think it's going to resonate with a lot of you who are listening to this series. At Rise 48, we're a real estate investment company, but the way that we think about our work goes beyond just improving properties and generating returns. We genuinely believe that when you invest in a community, you have a responsibility to invest in the people who live there too. That looks like hiring community managers who are present and engaged with residents. It looks like hosting monthly events for our residents to build an actual community. It looks like our team showing up together to volunteer and partner with nonprofits in the areas where we operate. For those of us who are faith-driven, I think there's also a deeper question underneath every investment decision, and it's not just what's the return, it's what is my capital actually building? Those two things should and can coexist together. At Rise 48, we built a model where strong returns and strong communities go hand in hand. If that's the kind of investment that you've been looking for, we'd love to connect with you and tell you about what we're building. You can learn more at rise48equity.com, and we'll get you right back to the episode.
Great. Oh, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's amazing. I think there's something that you were referencing, about your brother. When people have a peace, there's something about it that it's not like they have a halo above their head or they're walking on water, but there's just like a peaceful presence that is very easy to pick up on. And we've all been around people that kind of have like an anxious presence to them, where they're always worried or full of fear, or and there's something that kind of like pushes you away when you experience that. But when it's the opposite of that peace, kind of draws you in, and you kind of want to know more. And then when you figure out what is driving that peaceful presence, a lot of times I find it is that the love of the Lord, that that changes everything. And sometimes those are the people that are sometimes the most successful in work and with their marriages and with their kids and in their communities. I think there's something connected to leaders wanting to achieve a lot or have high ambition, but doing it, like being tethered or like attached to the vine of something greater than themselves. So it's really cool how you mentioned that. And man, that's a powerful. If we didn't talk about anything else, that might be the most important thing.
So, well, I was like, faith driven podcast, I'm in. Yeah, and it's so funny because like a lot of the so in Austin, my before I had come to Christ, like right when I was getting interested, I started asking all my friends, I'm like, "Do you guys go to church?" And every single one of my friends was Christian, and I had no idea. And then it was kind of just like God was always there. And then even with my a lot of my investors, like we didn't have this conversation, but turns out they were super Christian as well. I just kind of is there's been a lot of crazy things that have come into alignment.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, okay, so how do you feel like your faith shapes now the way you lead a young, fast-growing company? I've would want to hear more about like your success so far. I know you had um, a Kickstarter campaign that went really well, and then you're able to raise a lot of money after that. So, kind of walk us through that, and how does your faith like tie into shaping, leading this kind of fast-growing, youthful company?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, just the way that I make decisions, I consult a lot of people who have a close relationship with God. I have one advisor who's his name's James Floyd, and he's been helping me. I basically call him whenever I have a major decision, and he helps. He always points me back to the Bible, which I always appreciate, and he has way more knowledge about the Bible than I do, and that's something I really value because I'm trying, but I'm only a few years in. So on top of that, the entire ethos, my entire perspective on business is if you take care of the customer, the rest takes care of itself, and the whole focus is on service, listening to the customer, and then building what the customer wants and needs. And so sometimes they might not know what they need, and it's my job to ask questions to understand what, and then I know what's possible in terms from a product standpoint. So really focusing on serving the customer and doing the right thing. Um, obviously we're a startup hardware company. It has not been smooth sailing at all. And like there have been a number of different challenges from having to switch, to a different system, the manufacturing delays, to having to like completely switch suppliers in general, right? But trying my best to um, just do everything with integrity and doing what I think is right. And I think it's just the cornerstone of how I do business is, I try to do it with integrity in the way that I believe God wants me to.
Yeah, and I think courage is doing the right thing, even if no one is watching, right? I think as business owners, we're constantly having to make decisions, vendors, payroll, employees, customers, right? And sometimes we're dealing with situations that no one would ever see, but how you deal with those really makes a big difference. You know, I'd love to hear more about like what it's like having raised a pretty amount of a lot of money. How do you keep your identity anchored, with maybe some of this attention? I mean, you're talking about pro football teams using your product, and I can imagine there's probably some some allure to, hey, I could put this on my website that this team and this team and this team are using the product. Like, how do you keep your identity grounded?
I got to be honest with you. I genuinely I don't care. Like I do not care. Like I grew up. I played really high caliber lacrosse my whole life, so I was always around athletes. So the athletic stuff doesn't really phase me at all. Um, like my one of our core investors was Pat Spencer. He played for the Golden State Warriors. Now he's on the Suns. Cam Spencer, he's on the Grizzlies, and then a couple other pro guys. But all of them are just like my friends, and so it's really cool to talk to athletic trainers, to go to the Spurs facility, to go, you know, meet all these different people. It's really exciting, but like it is not something that is appealing. The thing that is difficult is like being in the luxury hospitality world that is just so foreign to how I grew up and like what I'm used to. That is the part that I think can get like a little like ego attached to it, I guess. And so really trying to just stay grounded in like what I'm trying to accomplish. Like the reality is the reason why if I could just focus, if I could have convinced investors to put in a couple $1 million so I could focus on the military use case, I would have, but I couldn't. And like that's the reality. And so I see this as step one here, and then ultimately getting to what I really care about. So um, I just really I like I love what I'm doing, and I think that's really what I try to stay grounded in. But I will say one of the things that's been the most difficult is business, and the decisions aren't as black and white as like when you're making decisions in business, the truth isn't as black and white. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like it's not as like there's so many different scenarios that the only way that I can get through it is through praying. Is I'm like, God, what is the right decision here? Because both decisions are terrible, you know. So yeah,
It makes a lot of sense, and it's not always doesn't always look like it does on paper, black and white, because there's nuance to everything. Let's talk about the calling, kind of back to this work, taking back the moment you realized was God was calling you to do this, not just build a business, but do it as an act of worship. What happened?
um, I would say when I was looking for a clinic that would do the research for cold water immersion, I called this organization, and if you have a second, you should look into them. They're called the Gray Team. They're an organization out of Florida. They've worked with thousands of veterans over the last 4 years and haven't lost a single one to suicide. They only use modern wellness tech interventions, and it's in community and teaching people how to, reintegrate into society.
Mm-hmm.
And I called them and I was like, oh my gosh, like a wellness tech clinic for PTSD, you guys gotta be using cold water immersion. And they're like, why would we do that? I'm like, no, no. I'm like, okay, can I get you a cold plunge and like you guys use it? And they were sitting there, they were just like, um, what's funny is we have this like little carve out that we've been staring at for the last few weeks, trying to figure out what we would put there, and it's the exact right space for a cold plunge. So like we're down. So I went and they picked out one of my competitors' cold plunge. They bought it, or I whatever we bought it. Chill Shark bought it, and we put it in there. And two months later, they came back and they're like, "This is one of the most impactful things we've added to our program." They're like, "It is the second most effective thing behind," and I forget what the other one was. I think it was maybe red light, but just it is something that everyone knows works, and the research isn't there to back it. And if you're going to start investing in cold water immersion research, you probably would focus on inflammation or a broader market application than just PTSD. So I was like, wow, like I am uniquely positioned to help make this happen, and I uniquely understand that it works and the medical community does not. So that is where like the mission started, and I realized like, wow, I can actually help people here. It's not yeah, and that's what kind of I just keep praying on it, and I feel like I'm supposed to be doing this, and maybe I'm not, but right now, I think I am.
Yeah, sweet. You mentioned before, like when you have a big decision, there's someone you call. How did that relationship start, and what does that look like on a regular basis?
Right? It's actually all these people, just all these Christians, just keep showing up in my life. It's the craziest. It's not that crazy, but so Beyond Angel Network is a like Dallas Baptist University has they are like an angel Christian focused angel network. And I went there, and student analysts are the people who do the diligence, and obviously they get help from all the investment committee and whatnot. But the analyst that I have, her name was Peyton Floyd, and I was going through diligence with them. They ended up picking us. We ended up presenting, and then um, we got some investors from there. But I got an email from a guy named James Floyd, who happened to be Peyton's dad, and he sent me an email. He was like, I read through the diligence report, and I would like to reach out to see how I can help you. And I guess he's been an investment banker for like 20 years. And he came and drove out to Dallas Baptist University and met me when I was at, I think it was like the Lions Den conference, which is like a Christian investor conference. And I sat down with him, and he was like, hey, like, first off, I think your idea is genius. And I was like, well, thank you. I think so. I think so too. um, um, but he said about like, I've only done this one other time in my career, but I like I helped the last company that I worked with raise $30 million, and I was a fractional CFO for them for 5 or 6 years, and it was because I believed in their mission, and I see that you actually are trying to accomplish something here, and I believe you have a good business model. So like, I just want to help you. And then we spent 45 minutes talking about the Bible and like 10 minutes talking about the business in that conversation. And he had just such a deep knowledge and understanding of Christ and the Bible and how it applies to business and the way that we live. And so that was how the relationship started. And now I talk to him at least 2, 3 times a week. But yeah, it's, it was pretty crazy. It came out of nowhere.
Sometimes those divine appointments can be life changing. That's really exciting. Um, what do you think is the hardest leadership lesson that God has taught you? How did it come, and what happened?
Uh, well, I'll just say the hardest leadership lesson in general, like how the biggest mistake was hiring for potential instead of hiring for, and I don't know if I can directly attribute this to like God teaching me this lesson. This could very much my own mistake, but just hiring for potential instead of hiring for the person who can actually execute.
Hmm.
And so early on, I made a lot of mistakes in terms of the people I brought on because I didn't know what I was looking for, partially because hardware is very complicated and I really didn't have a background in it. And so I had all these people who were on who didn't necessarily have the expertise that I needed, which set us back a significant amount of time in bringing this product to market. And then 5 months ago, I brought on a COO from a multi-billion-dollar company who's scaled hundreds of thousands of hot tubs across 80 different countries, and he's came on and completely changed everything we were doing from a supply chain standpoint, switch vendors, and we got the product to market quicker and for like a tenth of the cost. So, yeah, it was like the most eye-opening thing. He just was like, "I wish you would have hired me a year ago. Like, we it would have saved you so much money." But so just hiring off of potential is definitely hiring for potential versus experience was definitely my biggest mistake.
Yeah, man, it's a really good lesson. Let's talk about just like kingdom vision. What do you think it looks like for the church to be fully alive in the marketplace? I think a lot of people think about their faith as like maybe a Sunday thing or a Wednesday night thing. But I don't think a lot of people have the vision of I'm actually going to take my faith and who I am and who God has made me to be and bring that to the marketplace. What do you think would change if Christian business owners took their calling seriously?
I hear your answer to that question first.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think a couple things I think of. I think, why I want to be in the financial realm is I think, starting a business and investing in hard assets like real estate are probably some of the best ways to produce the opportunities and the resources ultimately for impact. I think when I look at the world, Keegan, it's broken. Like our local, area. I live in Minneapolis, broken. Minnesota, broken. United States, broken. The world, broken. There's so many opportunities, and I think what used to happen is local churches would solve those problems. Most of the hospitals are built because of Christians seeing a need and meeting a need. Whatever problem you want to tackle, homelessness, lack of food, you know, orphans and widows. Like, just take your problem that you see. And I think as kingdom minded leaders, if we had a vision to use our business as a vehicle for kingdom impact, I think our world would be changed. But I think so many people separate um, their faith and maybe kind of put it in a box, and they take out that box on Sundays, or maybe they do something on Wednesday night. But if we lived more with starting our day, Lord, what do you have for me today? Here are the meetings I have on my agenda. But if you want me to wipe those clean and call someone else, like, make it known. And I think living by faith and living by the Spirit is exciting, thrilling, and scary, really scary. But I think if more people started doing that, more faith-driven leaders, probably would start tackling more problems in the world.
Yeah, I think so too. Um, I think what comes up for me when you say that, um, one of the things the concept of surrendering to God, I had a tough time understanding that. And I still think it's something I wrestle with. But truly surrendering to God every morning and dropping on my knees and just being like, whatever you want, Lord, just please make it known, or take the business. I don't care, make it clear, whatever you want. Um, and really trying to surrender and deeply listen to what, I believe God wants me to do. And obviously, I'm not perfect in any capacity. And I, I think that if we all slowed down and tried to surrender more and truly listen to God, I think that we would find or people would find that they were in the completely wrong business or the wrong profession, and start really shifting their focus in a completely different way. And ultimately, I think that would change a lot. But, I think it does seem like there's a lot of um, activation of Christian capital, or people who are really trying to be more mission oriented. So that's been, just listening to the Lions Den, the speakers of the Lions Den was super encouraging as well. But I think that the more we can center on Christ in anything, it produces better results. It might not be economically, but for the world, absolutely.
Man, so good. Maybe just final question. If you're going to leave, one nugget of wisdom or something you didn't get a chance to say yet with our audience, what would that be?
Um, if you, I would say that the single most important thing you can do is to read the New Testament. If you are new to your faith, is to read the New Testament and ask yourself, if I applied what Jesus was saying to my life, is there anything that you can point to that, if you sit down and pray on, or really think about, wouldn't add a net positive to your life? And, I think that for me, that was like one of the biggest realizations when I was starting out. And don't confuse, people with God, because people will always fail you. And, for me, finding God has been the single most important thing that's had to happen in my life. Yeah.
And well, if people want to hear more about you or your company, where should they go?
They can email me, Keegan@chillshark.com.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the On the Rise podcast. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decisions, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the On the Rise podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.